Welcome to the Disability and podcast, bringing together thoughtful discussion and debate. This month, Disability Arts Online Senior Editor Colin Hambrook chats with Mike Layward about some of the events Dash have put on and the changes in the arts sector that he's observed over his 25 years with Dash.
Hi, and welcome to the Disability and podcast. I'm Colin Hambrook, the founding editor of Disability Arts Online, and I'm really delighted this month to welcome Mike Layward, who was the CEO, Artistic Director of Dash for over 20 years. And Mike, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, morning, Colin. It's lovely to be here. I feel like I'm in the illustrious place that many great disabled artists and activists have been down. So I feel very humbled to be here. So I suppose a quick intro on myself. I was artistic director of Dash from 1999, which seems such a long time ago. And I retired from that role in this year in September, because it seemed like the arts always needs a refresh and younger people coming through. I'd hit 70 in June, which is a bit hard to believe. That I think when I was in my 20s, I never believed that I'd get into anything beyond the 30s, live fast and die young, but it didn't happen, which I'm glad. I'm loving being 70. So now I'm an art student, and I'm still working for Dash as a freelancer for the time being on their Future Creators program, which is good because I feel like you set up a piece of work and it's good to better help it along and then have a proper handover period.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to talk about changes in the visual arts sector over the last 25 years or so. And to start off with, I wanted to ask you what brought you into working in disability arts and working for Dash.
It's interesting when you look back over a big period of time, and it probably wasn't until maybe about 2004, 2005 that I realized that I was a disabled person, that I defined myself that way. Up to then, I had worked a lot with disabled people, particularly disabled young people, in all sorts of settings. But I never saw myself as a disabled person. I think it was until I came into Dash, working for a disabled-led activist organisation, Shropshire Disability Consortium, learning about the medical model and the social model, did I come to understand my own life looking back, which is, I guess, not an unusual thing.
No, it was a similar for me as well, actually, in my journey. It took probably about 6 years for me to kind of realize that I was also a disabled person, that the barriers that I'd faced had brought me into disability arts and made me excited about disability arts. Was that a similar thing for you?
So coming into Dash was such a learning and such a relief to be coming at it from such a different direction. And working for Shropshire Disability Consortium, I learned so much from the people working there. I guess I brought a participatory arts and community arts viewpoint into Dash, and then mixing that into disability arts seemed to go really well with a sort of an empowerment and engagement side.
And what was your connection with the visual arts?
I'd been working in the arts since the mid-70s, mostly in participatory performance, but then I started also doing things like running a silkscreen workshop and got into carnival. So that sort of making performance crossover, and then later on, I went and did a access course in art and design and started a fine art degree part-time before I took the job at Dash. So visual arts had always been an undercurrent there, mixed in with performance.
were there any particular pieces of work or any particular artists from that time who kind of grabbed you and inspired you?
Well, I was really lucky that Gary Robson had a long time link with Dash. He directed some of the Dash festivals. So meeting Gary was great because he taught me loads. He was a great co-worker. He was very funny. He was also very challenging. And he introduced me to loads and loads of people, people like Caroline Parker, loads and loads of disabled performers. And I think he just gave me a broad view of how disability arts was working at that time. And also he was someone who was always, he was a bad boy. He challenged things. He didn't accept a sort of status quo of the disability arts, which it did feel was a bit rigid at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a sort of a sense, certainly, I think, towards the end of the 90s, where the code that you were meant to adhere to became more strict, and more people being excluded from disability arts. And
it's like the Labour Party.
yeah, it was a bit like a Keir Starmer kind of conspiracy that was happening. I fought against that from within London Disability Arts Forum, and it's the reason why I established Disability Arts Online, because I wanted to free things up. And I think that was probably one of the first times we met. I think was in those days where I was kind of, I kind of reached out to the disability sector at that time, and set up some meetings.
Yeah.
I got a bit of seed funding from the Arts Council and set some meetings up, and we had a bit of a think tank around what role Disability Arts Online could perform. That was kind of the beginning of the internet, really, and that was really exciting. That there was the kind of sense of possibility of how we could use the internet to network and to share disabled artists' voices and to critique work. And can you remember some of your first projects with Dash?
Yeah, it was funny because I came in and inherited of the old Arts Council, but it would be an Arts Council GB, but it was Arts Council England, but it hadn't been regionalised in the way that all the regions were independent, or they weren't independent because they got all their money from the Arts Council, but they were looking after their own funding. But it was a national fund, and Shropshire Disability Consortium had put in a clear programme. But when I arrived, I said, did I have to stick to it? And the great answer was no, which was brilliant, because it's always awful to have to do work that other people think is good, but you're not so excited. So one of the things I was really impressed with, things like the Octopus Club that was just starting then, and I'd done a little bit of work with Heart and Soul, had come down to Barnstaple and blown people's minds. Like, they showed a film about one of their performers being married, having a child, and it was definitely upsetting some of the people on the committee, that the idea that any of their residents would go out and have sex. So it was brilliant. And I thought, here in a rural area, to have a touring nightclub would be great. And luckily I had a really big budget, so I just spent lots of money and did these sort of, they couldn't be all-nighters, but they were running from about 7:30 till about 1 in the morning, which is sort of unknown out here, that things happen like that. And getting a real mix of performers, of poets, filmmakers, dance, theatre, having visual arts up there as well. So it was a big thing. And then having accessible transport buses organised. It was a crazy idea. The budget got spent very quickly, and we couldn't maintain the audience. When you try something out, you hope it will get a sort of momentum and build up. But I guess being in a rural area, that couldn't happen because people from the urban areas, it was just, we weren't that well connected, say, into Wolverhampton or Birmingham or even Manchester. So people weren't going to know about it or travel. But it was good. I think it connected us up regionally with a lot of different people.
It sounds like a lot of fun as well. It reminds me a little bit of your 2012 moment with the when the big sort of rural arts festival you created with Aaron Williamson and Catherine Araniello doing bizarre, wild things in ridiculous costumes.
Yeah, that was quite an event. That was M21, from medieval to the 21st century, in Much Wenlock, because I lived in Much Wenlock for about 10 years, and a strange place, but it was the birthplace of the modern Olympics. And it was a stupid idea to try and hold an event like that in a very quite an isolated place, not easy transport links, but it was also brilliant as well.
Yeah.
It was a really good event, and we had a little bit of stick because we didn't get massive audiences, and it was a sense where of the idea for we are invisible, we are visible. There was definitely stuff laid down there where we didn't do lots of promotion because we wanted a shock thing. Like Naomi Lackmeyer had 2 or 3 people she was the baton in a race around town. So they would, every so often, she would start the race by being pulled out of her chair and hailed by a man who would run around and pass it to another man and go around the town. And people were coming up to the stewards and saying, I just saw this woman in a wheelchair being hiked off, and this man ran away with her. and so there was that element of what I love about anything in the streets performance that can be, people don't quite know what's real and not real.
Disability arts performance has been kind of central really to the evolution of disability arts within the visual arts.
Yeah.
Was that an opportunity that you kind of sought to engage with from quite early on?
I've always liked street theatre and live art, and where that sort of street theatre has moved into live art. And I've always liked what the opportunity of working in unusual spaces. And I think at that time, it's really only in the last 10, 14 years that we've really started to get connected to galleries. Up to that time, we were very outside of the system of visual arts. We had no connections really with any curators. To be honest, I didn't really understand how the gallery system worked. Like a lot of artists I was mentoring in the last few years, a similar position. It seems like an amazing monolithic edifice that you don't really understand how you would ever get the doors to creak open a little.
Mm-hmm. What were your first attempts at connecting with those gatekeepers and opening those channels?
Yeah, that was around about 2009 when we'd been doing Tanya Raba was working for Dash then as an employee, and she did a development program with artists. And one of the questions they said, how do I get my work shown in any of the regional galleries? And we realized that we didn't know how to do that. We didn't know anyone in those galleries. We thought we better start making some inroads here. So we did go out in a very stroppy way, really. We had money, we were offering money. We went with the idea that they would hate us, they wouldn't like us. And so we went in quite a sort of activist, angry way. We had to sort of repair stuff after that because people did want to work with us, but we didn't really trust them. It was an interesting thing because until you build up a relationship of trust, which takes some time, you feel that you're just going to get used. And So we worked with Wolverhampton Art Gallery, we worked with Oriel Davis in Newtown in Wales, and what was the third one? It was the Public, which is gone now. So that they were three good galleries to work with. But we did things like we wouldn't hand the budget to the gallery. We kept hold of the money because we didn't trust them. And realized after that we had to really change our way of working with galleries, that it was fine. But we went as the sort of knocking on the door, asking them to let us work with them. And we would bring all the money in. We would do everything. So it was quite like the poor supplicants at the sort of cathedral's door. And I think we started to realize that we could, after what we learned from that, was that we could take more power and we could actually start selecting galleries, which was a real change that galleries would have to apply to work with us.
In that early time, what were the work that you were putting in those galleries?
So Naomi Lackmeyer got Wolverhampton. We had Catherine and Aaron, Disabled Avant-Garde in Newtown, and they did their Camp Dag, which was a disabled travellers camp in the park, which was brilliant. The gallery really went for it, and the council let them build the camp over 2 days. And one of the workers there had a pony, so she bought the pony. They were allowed to have a fire as long as it off the ground. And they had a couple of caravans. So the premise of it was, I think, like for Catherine and Aaron living in London, that if it had happened in a park in London, there would have been some petitions being written about the gypsies in the park, get them out. But because they were in rural mid Wales, what was happening is travellers would come and say, how did you get permission to set your camp up here? Can you let us know who did that? Because we always get chucked off. So the sort of, it was working opposite, that people were really interested, but also being just letting it happen in the park, but there was no petition started. But it was great. It was a great piece. And it was also, we had about 6 or 8 younger Welsh disabled artists involved in the camp. So there was about 10 people in the camp.
Yeah. The photos look wild, and Catherine and Aaron working together were always a kind of a force of nature, really.
Yeah, I loved working with both of them. I just found them always, they were just great. They put so much time and energy, and everything's built on humor. And I just think, as what I've always loved, I can't really take stuff that's heavy and serious, because I think there's something, our humor is such a subversive art form.
I totally agree. I think the visual arts are so rooted in this idea of patronage, and the canon of the history of art. The language gets very dense and impenetrable. Disability arts is about it's about real stuff in life, and if you can't put humor into that, then what can you do?
Yeah, I realize saying that can sound trite, because sometimes what you need to talk about, what you need to work on is got a lot of anger, anger from dispossession, and that's important to better put in there as well. And it may not be funny, because it's such a powerful piece of feeling that you have, what it's telling your story.
How did your vision for Dash evolve over the years that you were there? Because that sort of breaking down those barriers to the visual arts was key to that. I feel.
My first thought was making it up as I went along, which was definitely a feeling of that at times, and try not to be scattergun, but also being experimental, trying out things that may not work, or that they might be an idea that you'll use again later, like we did an accessible transport scheme there's a rural touring arts organization in the area called Arts Alive, who do work in village halls, and we worked in one district of Shropshire, providing transport for anyone who wanted to get there. And mostly it meant that people got a taxi from their home to the event and back again, and it was like brilliant. It was like being having a chauffeur, because if you wouldn't have gone to those events and paid for the taxi, because it would have probably cost you 20-25 pounds just for the taxi. But that didn't get continued, but we learned a lot about ideas like that. But one of the things I felt was that we could have been pushed down a strategic road and, being a disability representative in lots of regional bodies. And I really didn't want that. It just would have felt for me like a real death knell as an arts organization. And it wasn't my skill. I can see they could have been important, but I knew that I'd just got very frustrated by that sort of interminable meetings and policy planning. So I think the vision was always about being artist-led. I think when I came into it, as working as an artist, I'd always felt organizations were very self-centered, and the artists were like their servants and usually weren't properly paid, and the conditions and all of that treatment wasn't great. And I thought, well, if I'm leading an organization, that's one thing I can definitely do, is make the artist the center of the organization, and try and have a proper pay rate and treat the artists properly as proper workers in the organization.
Tanya Weber, I was first aware of her work sort of way back in the late 90s, and she was making extraordinary collage at that time about disabled women's bodies and sexuality and the control over women's bodies by the medical system and by the powers that be, and there were very powerful images. Tanya Weber must be an artist that has been central to Disability Arts Shropshire.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Tanya, she was a great co-worker, and she, she was developing her own work, but she was also really keen on developing Dash. So, I mean, she's a Dash trustee, she's a member of the board, and has been for quite a while. So, yeah, you really need critical friends, I think, all the time, because none of us are perfect. We might think we are, but you can, because you think you've got a great idea, or the process you're working on is good, but just to be challenged and step back and think, oh, okay, yeah, I haven't thought about that. I think for it to have the confidence of Dash becoming a visual arts organization, Tanya, I think, was fundamental in that, because she brought that true artist knowledge, and then as a disabled artist, the two things together brought that confidence to move into the visual arts sector.
And there was always a participatory element to Tanya's work. She always brings in that participatory element, and it includes other less experienced disabled artists in giving some experience and showcase, and she's great. Absolutely.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it is really interesting talking about art school, because she must be a handful probably of disabled visual artists from the time she was training at art school were feeling that they could get in and that they could survive it. There's not that many, and that does make a difference. I can really see. So to have someone there as a sort of a role model and a mentor, really important.
Can you kind of give us some other favorite kind of projects and moments in your time?
Yeah, well, like Awkward Bastards was great. I mean,
Yeah.
Awkward Bastards was another one that the first one was great. And the second one, I think, was sometimes when you go back and try something and try and take it further, it's almost like it didn't quite, it was too much. We crammed too much into the second one. The first one was just right. It was like a proper meal. But the concept as well, that to bring different diverse groups together and different diverse sort of artistic leaders seemed really important.
And the concept behind Awkward Bastards was that as disabled people that we have to constantly kind of assert our our right to be. Do you want to say a bit more about that?
Yeah, it's that I always said that it's that feeling you get in a room when you say when either you start talking about the exclusion of disabled people or disabled artists, or to say, oh, I define myself as a disabled person. There's a sort of a quietness that goes, and it's that awkwardness. And sometimes it can feel as strong as, I wish you weren't in this room, actually. You've made our comfort, you've made us feel uncomfortable, actually. So it's that feeling of how nice you are and how much you don't want to upset people. Often just by your presence, you're upsetting a comfortable structure. I guess it's that thing, isn't it? It's about the ableism of society, so that you will always be a disruptor to that mode, unless it's really clearly stated this is not what this is about.
Can you tell us a bit about who you brought to the first Awkward Bastards conference?
Well, we had Gary as the compere, because it felt like, to stop it being a boring event that had just speaker, and it starts to get really wearing. We needed Gary to come in and keep a sort of an energy going and a sort of a humor in there. We had David Turner, who's professor in Swansea University, who'd just been on Radio 4 on their disability history program.
Mm-hmm.
So he did the keynote speech around awkwardness and looked at particular historical examples of awkwardness. We had Abid Hussain, me, Gary Robson. We had Tony Heaton did a whole piece. God, yeah, and and then the afternoon starts to drift away. I can't remember what else we had.
I didn't make the first one, but the second one at the Mac, I remember the vacuum cleaner. He was particularly awkward.
Oh God, he was. He wouldn't use a mic, so it was really hard for the interpreters and then the people doing palantypists, and it was hard to hear him.
His work around sort of reimagining the asylum and challenging psychiatry, I think it's been a really important progress, really. And I think, though, for people like myself who come from a mental health background and coming into disability arts, there's always been a very strong hierarchy of impairment. And the barriers and challenges that we face as coming from a survivor background have been very misunderstood and very difficult to impregnate even the disability arts world. And the vacuum cleaner's done a terrific job, I think, of challenging those barriers and of opening things up.
Yeah, because I met vacuum cleaner the first time when I was at Leeds Uni doing my MA in activism and social change. And one of the modules was bringing in different activists to run workshops with us. And he was brought in, and he'd been doing work with Reverend Billy from America, who does a sort of an anti-consumerist church. So he took us all out to do these different interventions in supermarkets and Primark. And it felt like being in somewhere like Berkeley University in 1968. He had a real coherence about his ideas, but at that time, which would have been about 2008, I think he was just finding it hard. I think he just didn't want to be boxed, and maybe still feels to not be boxed, put in one box and defined around that. That I think he feels his definition of who he is much more holistic.
I can really see the value of that as well. I think that disability arts to evolve, it has to become more nuanced and challenge itself continually. And the boxing of things is it's really important to continually question what that's about.
One of the things that I've sort of been looking at in these few months of being at art school is that I think all our struggles are interconnected, and they're not in competition, that they're all supporting each other. But it's hard to see that at times. Yeah. And sometimes I think, particularly as disabled people, we can feel really invisible in struggles that are happening. But I think it's always important to remember, like, all of the land and environmental struggles are all our struggles as well, because we're dispossessed from the land in the same way. So that sort of much more interconnected approach, I think, is the sort of positive way for the future, because we have to sort of hold our core of who we are and what is important for us and our basic requirements that we need for ourselves to be able to do what we're doing, but to not just be looking inward, but interconnecting beyond ourselves.
Going back to your struggles through your time at Dash to kind of gain some foothold in the gallery sector, how have you kind of made the argument to those gatekeepers? I think
you must know this one, that the people who want to hear what you've got to say will listen because they've thought about it. And if they haven't thought about it, they're open to the idea. And the people who don't want to hear it won't hear it. So I think the statistics in the visual arts just speak for themselves. What the Arts Council put out, you can see, anyone who looks can see how few disabled people are employed in any level in galleries, but particularly when you get to the senior level, and how few disabled artists are shown.
You've done a great job with the Future Curators program.
Yeah.
How did those conversations evolve?
So the planning for Future Curators was started way earlier than usual, which I think has made the real difference. And the fact that for the last nearly a year, we've been working on setting up the working process and structures with the 6 galleries is so different to the first one, and it's been really unusual. So by the time it actually starts, it will feel like a project that's run by a collective of galleries, not galleries that are working with Dash, but Dash is leading. Dash is just the coordinator. And I guess as an anarchist, it seems to me like a great anarchist organization that people feel they've got a voice in it and that they're helping to shape it. So what my hope with things like that is that if truly people are engaged, that then you hope that they would take that on and it would just be embedded in their organization, so that it means that they're taking the work on and it will go on into different ways that they'll do in the future.
I think that was really inspired, that idea of putting disabled curators into galleries. The whole notion of curating from a disability perspective.
Yeah.
I thought that was genius, and it was so obvious as well that they were the gatekeepers. They were the ones who had the influence, and that was the way to sort of penetrate that wall. But it feels to me that opening up, you know, art history and looking in a more nuanced way at how artists' work reflects barriers. And WAWAV was we are invisible, we are visible. The possibility there was really exciting of tracing the work of disability arts and the art of protest back to the Dada movement. I think that is very exciting, that idea that we can frame the work in a way that the visual arts sector, that the gatekeepers will understand, because art school is so much about, you have to learn this history of basically it's a history of collections and a history of patronage, and it's not about creativity, it's about a history of bondage to where the money is. And I think disability arts kind of framing itself around that history of the art of protest, that was a brilliant move on your part.
Yeah, I think what all you said there was just perfect about the linking of an art movement, so that not that we sort of latched on like a flea to the back of Dada, but we said, look, there is real interconnections here. So like if you want to treat us seriously, then you can see that we aren't just a group of people in a care, in a residential home or a day centre, that this is a serious art form that has got roots that you can trace through. And it's such an unknown what influence something like WAWAV has, because I don't think you could ever really evaluate its impact, because so much of it is unknown. I think one of the things as well that I sort of take away from WAWAV was that the galleries didn't get paid a penny, and they knew they weren't going to get, it wasn't like big sort of PR that was going to sort of, like they're going to have an international artist that they can make. But those that were involved, 90%, if not 95% of them really went way beyond what I expected. I thought we were trying to keep their involvement to a minimum because they were getting no money, and it feels like they're quite stretched. And they went for it because they loved the idea as well.
And I think the audiences loved it as well.
Yeah.
I went to the Towner in Eastbourne and saw Andrea Mindell set up making her goldwork piece in the foyer of the gallery, and so the audiences were confronted and engaged with her immediately walking through the front door.
Yeah, and similar at the Icon in Birmingham with Aaron Williamson. People hung around for a long time because, in one hand, nothing was really happening, but it was so curious what was happening that I thought a lot of people just would look in and then go straight out, but people spent a lot of time there, and then there was a place set up where to take photographs. And yeah, people were engaged with it in its oddity.
Yeah. I loved the images of his Dazzle costume.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful thing, as well as being very, very funny and very having that historical connection as well to that framing of art. And very really clever piece.
Yeah, the classic Aaron Williamson, isn't it? I mean, all of the things like when he did our promo film, when we had to do a presentation and he dressed as the Invisible Man and sang that song. It's just, I just loved it. And I knew that was a big part of why we got it, because it was very funny. You were like, it felt like for the people awarding the money, they were like being offered this unknown treasure box that if they said yes, it could only be great. So yeah, it was, what an amazing thing. I laughed so much when I heard we were shortlisted, because I never thought that would happen. And then I laughed even more all day when I was told we got it. I thought, what have they done? What have they done? That doesn't usually happen to us in disability art, that we should get awarded. But a massive prize, £150,000. It was like, wow.
Yeah, a real moment in of joy.
Yeah.
And it was a terrific project to be part of as well. And I really hope WAWAV happens again. I hope it's something that we can think about collaborating, with Dash and maybe other organizations within disability arts sector,
Yeah.
to find funding to make it happen. Mike, what's next for you? What are you?
I don't know. I just think I'm probably going to start making more live art pieces, but I'm really also into textiles. I really like silkscreen printing, and I'm teaching myself to use a sewing machine, and so I don't know.
I really look forward to seeing some of the results. And are you going to blog or post some of your creations?
I should do that, shouldn't I? I guess I will.
You should take up a blog on DAO.
Yeah, okay, I'll do that. I also should start an Instagram page, but God, I'm just not a great. I've got much better actually since I've been at college with digital work, but I'm just somehow, some people are really good at creating their digital profile and making sure everything's on there and putting all that effort in. I'm just a bit lazy, I think.
I think it's wonderful that you've after all this time at Dash, you've gone back to being an artist, and the aspiration to be an artist is something that has never left me. I've kind of spent all my life trying to get there.
But it's hard to get the time, isn't it? When an energy, when you've got your tasks in your job.
And it's such a the thinking process is the thinking hat you need.
Yeah.
It's you need to sort of put the practical thinking processes aside and really go into the more creative side of the brain, and it's not something that's easy to switch on and switch off, I think.
Yeah, and you need space and time for that.
Yeah.
What's really interesting, I think, is in the difference of when we were younger, and because I'm working alongside 18 to 19-year-olds who are doing their foundation, which is great to be in that mixed age of people in their 50s, 60s, and people in 18, 19, and that real change about people self-identifying in their sort of gender and sexuality, and then how many we've always known that so many artists and art students will be neurodivergent, but how it's more and more students acknowledge it and talk openly about it. Slight uncomfortableness when people talk about something so personal, but it's definitely happening. And I'm just thinking that wouldn't have happened maybe even 10 years ago. So yeah, I find that really hopeful.
That feels like a really good note to bring the conversation to a close. It's been a delight as always to talk to you, Mike, and I hope that we can continue our conversation from time to time. And I look forward to engaging with you more. And a big thank you to all of our audience for listening in on the Disability and podcast. And any last words, Mike?
No, just to say, as ever, it was really brilliant just chatting with you, because it just feels like we've got so many things where we fire each other off. Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you for listening. We do hope you enjoyed this episode of Disability and. Please join us next month when Mind the Gap's associate producer Paul Wilshaw chats with freelance actor Rob Ewins about his success and some of the stories and experiences he's had over the years.